Hello and welcome to the Toronto Daily News for Friday, January 25th of January, 2019. So people for 200,000 years or so of prehistory just treated the forests like a farm. It's sort of constantly scavenging, just grazing basically. We were grazing a lot, and a little bit of hunting, maybe a little bit of primitive trapping and stuff like that. And now two people in Ontario have decided to try to do this, try to just live off of the scavengeables in Ontario. So this is reported by CTV News Northern Ontario. Headline is challenged to eat only wild local food for 1 year. So the cannabis situation in Ontario, it's been a little rough, depending on the mail to deliver weed. And so the next stage, apparently, of the Ontario Cannabis Store is going to be to get couriers to do same-day service. So they're looking for somebody, some contractor courier service to take this on for a $500,000 contract. I don't know what the term is, but this is reported by CTV News London, and it's Ontario Cannabis Store seeking courier for same-day pot services. It's tough to get around in the winter for pedestrians, especially, and for pedestrians who are not good at walking on ice, especially. So we've definitely been seeing a lot of this in Toronto. People with mobility equipment like motorized assistance equipment and stuff like that. Anyone who's hobbling around or whatever, even people who normally do find taking their weird sort of pull carts to the grocery store and back are having trouble. This North Bay woman was interviewed by CTV News there about her situation in their article, Snow Causing Accessibility Issues in North Bay. A man was arrested for pointing guns at police. So they showed up at his home, and he's pointing all these guns and gun-like objects or something like that at him. This is reported by CTV News in their Northern Ontario edition. So the OPP is going to close Highway 11. Did close Highway 11 at Highway 631, Highway 11 at Highway 631 to clean up some serious hazardous debris from a recent crash or something like that. So reported by CTV News, Northern Ontario. So the fake news scene, you can make money. You can if you can write a little bit. There's lots of people who get paid to write fake news, fake fake reviews, fake opinion, whatever. So MediaGazer.com has done this article about the situation with that in India. Researchers say India's political parties are using armies of volunteers to spread misinformation and hate. Hate speech via WhatsApp group chats ahead of elections. So that's reported by MediaGazer. There's in Santa Fe. There's a museum collection exploring water protectors and the history of their encounters with indigenous water protectors and their allies and stuff, and their history of encounters with settlers, with the authorities representing settlers. And so this is reported by AnishinabeNews.ca, and the article, and I think the exhibit as well, is called Beyond Standing Rock, the Past, Present, and Future of Water Protectors. New book says number of errors made at Stanley trial. This is reported by NBC Radio. So the trial of the trial of the killer Gerald Stanley, who shot Colton Boushie. This is in Saskatchewan in 2016. Right, the killer, he was acquitted of all of the charges, but now the jury selection process and also the sort of judges like debriefing and stuff leading up to the trial is being called into question. So this is an interesting article reported by NBCRadio.com. And somebody tried to like just grab this child off the street at like Park Lawn and in the Humber Bay neighborhood, Park Lawn and Barry Road, which is just if you're not familiar with the location, just check it out on Google Street View or something like that. It's just like sprawling, it's basically like, I don't know, interstitial tundra. And so this kid was walking down the street. Somebody tried to with like a bunch of other kids, and this 50-year-old white dude, like pretty tall, and kind of big. He tried to like nab this child. So this is CBC News reported this. And police investigating alleged attempted abduction in the West End. So cities they kind of struggle to deal with street art, and the thing is, like, there's murals, and there's always been like murals and basically just artwork and stuff, and then there's tagging, and they sort of cross over, but generally, like, cities like murals and don't like tagging. And part of that, I think, is because tagging is when you're not contributing to the beauty of the place or whatever. You're contributing your footprint to the place. And cities don't like having random citizens signing their name on ugly bits of stuff. And generally, it is done on ugly bits of stuff. And this could just change at any time. And there's always been like a few taggers in any given city who are just totally, part of their point is, respecting no boundaries in terms of where they want to place their tags, or even, like there's vandalizing corporate stuff or whatever. But so Toronto's scheme, now that I've the lead up to this could be way thicker than the actual thing. So the city of Toronto has been doing like this sort of sponsorship like campaign. They always have something going on to try to we'll give you the paint, just tell us what you want to paint so it's cool and we can whatever. At a certain point, I think Rob Ford actually paid to have a mural removed because he thought it was illegal, but it was actually one of these city-sponsored projects. That is true, I think. But so their most recent street art initiative is still going on. So if you like, this is, everybody who this is where the people who are willing to go through a little bit of paperwork and stuff like that and do a little bit of coordinating with artists and whatever, and who come up with the ideas that the city they're mushy enough that the city can deal with them, will be the ones who, the cross section of people who get influence over, the public domain of art in the city. And so it's a funny little scene. And so now the city has launched this street art map for locals and visitors, and CTV News reported on it. So this is basically the city's way of saying, you know, this is our endorsed stuff. The government shutdown in the States is continuing to roll into airport chaos and stuff like that. You got American politicians, high up politicians who are totally out of touch, talking about how, you know, oh, it's just a little bit of sacrifice. Donald Trump's daughter or something, or his wife, I forget who, is talking about how it's a little bit of pain or something for the greater good, and it's this tiny little portion of it. It's insane. But meanwhile, at LaGuardia, airport flights, this is reported by the CBC, halted due to staffing issues amid partial government shutdown. So the fluoridation situation. Brought to you by, when you can't find unfluoridated spring water and the tap water is basically giving you a hangover because of the fluoride, it's distilled water time, and it's not the best, but whatever. So the fluoridation situation is these two Calgary Herald articles, I think. It's basically this one Calgary Herald article responding to another about the fluoridation and defluoridation controversy in Calgary. Of course, this affects us in Toronto because we are fluoridated and nobody's really fluoridated. It's just a short list of places that are. And so this article is pretty explosive. The decay in has increased since the fluoridation was removed. Fluoridation saves money. You save up to $140 in dental care for every dollar you spend on fluoridation, and there's no evidence of harm at the 4 parts per million level. 4 is just crazy. Like 4 parts per million is. Fluorosis from fluoridation is mild white flecks, and it's only dentists can see it. And the European and other countries have been fluoridating their salt. We just do this. And so this article in the Calgary Herald under opinion, and it's not really, it's opinion only because it's about fluoride. It debunks all of this, and I don't know, and maybe more. And it also sort of raises the issue of how corrupt, how exposed to industrial corruption our medical advice has been. And so they start with this list, a classic list of like DDT, thalidomide, et cetera, et cetera. And I want to add to that list electromagnetic fields. And it's of course, electromagnetic hypersensitivity has already been debunked, by a research study that didn't really test people for the amount of time that it takes most people to develop symptoms, and really sketchy little study. And it's still, the Women's College Environmental Health Clinic is still totally convinced that it's a legit illness. The CBC is doing all these specials on sleep, and they sort of make vague allusions to how people's sleep used to be better, now it's shit. And the list of excuses they give is not that great, and they keep they're trying to educate Canadians about sleep apnea and get everybody using CPAP machines. So they're promoting CPAP machines. So it's all about sleeping with a big mask on your face and while you're exposing yourself to like the allergens and all these toxins in the air and stuff like that. And of course, the magnetic fields that a lot of people have this the first response is insomnia, and just difficulty, and just all sorts of sleep disruption. So, and this is while the infrastructure that creates these fields and stuff is reaching way past the saturation point in Canada. So the fluoride situation and the electromagnetism situation are kind of there. Those are the two things that are the new DDT, or the new fluoride, or the new the new thalidomide and stuff like that, the new Teflon. So in talking about this, so no mention of whether there will be, affordable or like low cost housing involved with it, but in the Sugar Beach area, and I think we all saw this coming, starting with two big towers. I should just do a better intro. So they're gonna make this gleaming new all integrated city on the waterfront, where, just picture this: you're rich. You'll have to be. You're rich, and you live in the tower, and you walk through the underground tunnel to the daycare with your kid and drop them off, and then you go to work through the underground tunnel that you walk through, and you go to your office and blah 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 blah, and then you go through the other tunnel. This is in winter, like, obviously, this is what those tunnels are for, but or on crappy rainy days, and then you go to the gym, the grocery store, etc. Your whole thing. You can do your whole thing, and it's this whole neighborhood, this concept, whole high tech and high end, everything like that neighborhood, coming to basically the Sugar Beach area, right? So this is east of Yonge on the waterfront, and it's going to be massive. So the Star is reporting this article about it, and they just didn't mention whether or not any of it would be cheap. So. Remember, I was talking about food and how, how there's this at least 200,000 years of history of humans, putting together this kind of like, well, this a little bit of hunting, a little bit of gathering, a little bit of kind of forest farming, forest gardening, where you're just constantly just maintaining the forest as you're harvesting, you're sort of planting, And you've got these little plots where you've got certain things all planted together in these kind of pods, right? And you go to harvest each one. Stuff like that. So not only that, but apparently we used to have this massive global trade network, and we've been finding just different, of course, like tools and stuff like that. But now it's quinoa. Quinoa? Yes, quinoa. It's quinoa. I know how to pronounce that. I don't know why I'm mispronouncing it. Okay. So Quartz, publication called simply Quartz, is reporting ancient Canadian quinoa suggests food globalized earlier than we thought. Yay! So apparently Toronto's Field Trip, the Field Trip Festival, they're saying, don't worry, we'll be back next year. We just needed a break. And boy, I know how that feels. So Billboard.com is reporting this. Karen Bliss at Billboard. Futurism.com reports Amazon's facial recognition struggles with darker skin. It can't recognize Black people. Sort of, that's kind of enviable, actually, a little bit. So this reminds me of back in the day when Kodak had to release a special kind of film that captured brown properly, just the whole space of between brown and black, because their previous film was actually racist. It just didn't render that whole color space well. It just had this. It sort of had a hole in. So a lot of things just didn't photograph very well. But basically, Black people specifically, and so Kodak Gold was basically, they introduced the brown color space into their film. So I guess Amazon, their AI is also racist. So this is reported by Futurism.com. And Narcity has the scoop on the OSAP protests, and they reported on this big protest downtown. Thousands marched, apparently, in protest of OSAP changes in Toronto, and here's what you missed. And they have video. They have the video. I'm going to watch that. And the food guide. So we know that it's the new one is the first one that is not basically based on industry needs and stuff like that. We know it's the first one that reflects any kind of like coherent dietary, advice that holds up. But it's not the first one that includes Indigenous food, but it might be the last one that doesn't. The Health Canada has like indicated, and APTN News has picked up the story, that they're gonna start to might sort of think about doing a little bit of just so this Toronto basically sort of think tank and research organization, Citizen Lab, they do all this different kind of research, and they've been getting targeted recently. People like basically, I guess, spies, entrapping them into like meetings and stuff, and probably videotaping them to get to try and get, I don't know, try and get info out of them. So just read the Globe and Mail article about this. Undercover agents target Toronto-based cybersecurity watchdog Citizen Lab. And you got to hear this crazy story and it really shows so social workers, for a lot of people in Canada, social workers are basically their gatekeepers to life. And if you haven't depended on one at whatever level, it's difficult to imagine what it's like to do so. And so to try to imagine what it's like for the social worker to actually be kind of your root admin think for life is a little bit much for a lot of people to wrap their heads around. But in that position, under Canada's kind of sketchy guidelines and stuff, it's possible to really profit off of fraud. So this one guy and an accomplice is the subject of this APTN News investigation called Broken Trust. And the headline is, BC social worker sought out Indigenous high-risk youth because nobody would adequately safeguard their... it's loading. It's just loading. I'm never using Flipbook to organize my news again. I experimented today, and it was a bad idea. Their interests. So this is actually a class action lawsuit that is being put together to address this person's victims, and he was a social worker. He basically sought out the people who he could completely dominate, people who were not going to be, who he could really have a lot of jurisdiction over, and destroyed their lives to make money. There's this one case of somebody who had an adult who they liked, they wanted to be with. Adult felt the same way, wanted to adopt the child officially. The social worker lied to both people. Social worker lied to the child and said adult didn't want them because of their anger issues, and lied to the parent and said they've disengaged, they've run away, or something like that. I'm probably misquoting that. And they go through a whole bunch of different cases of this stuff. And this really looks like just the tip of the iceberg of a whole bunch of just exploitation. And so it's basically all about taking, just siphoning off little bits and pieces of support money and stuff and resources that were supposed to go to the participants, people who are like foster children and stuff like that. So check out the APTN News article about it. So some dudes who used to be part of the Soldiers of Odin showed up at this mosque, kind of walked around all suspicious and weird, and they're standing out front and stuff. And they get in this like confrontation, start asking questions. And the pretext is like, we wanted to visit the bathroom. So Global News got the scoop. This is in Edmonton. And like right away, these like the attendees at the mosque like called the cops on these guys, and it's at the Al Rashid Mosque. Crazy talk. It's drivers gotta be reined in somehow, because they just keep crashing into buildings and stuff, stores and whatever. Everything is in shambles, reads the headline of the Global News article about this vehicle. A vehicle that drove through this Nova Scotia thing. Not a driver that drove through, but a vehicle. The vehicle drove through, and the driver was inside the vehicle as a bystander. And this is how they continually, this time it's Global News. This is how they report on vehicular stuff. There was a recent news report where the I think this was Global, but no, it was like CTV Toronto, where they phrased it as it's unclear right now what happened that caused the pedestrian to be struck. And they just word it in this ridiculous way. Like, instead of saying it's unclear what happened, it's unclear what caused the driver to strike the pedestrian. So yeah, in Nova Scotia, this lady or this guy, I don't know. They like people dove for cover. Apparently the driver was elderly, but they just drove right through the shop. So of course, Global News reports on it as the car drove through. The passenger, of course. Well, the driver is the bystander. That's always the tone, is the driver as a bystander. So apparently the situation at StatsCan, this Stats Canada, which is also, we keep getting awards for having this great, for StatsCan being so awesome. But apparently they suck. According to the Globe and Mail, they have a history of like just losing or willfully destroying data, like to save space and stuff like that. And apparently they're good at tying bits of data together, and just terrible at keeping and disseminating the data. At a certain point, to get more funding, they started selling data, and so researchers just like actually have a hard time doing research because you have to buy statistics. So this guy got arrested in Kingston, and he was being investigated on national security grounds. Apparently, he's this Syrian refugee who was planning to, or trying to get somebody to build a bomb and start bombing people. And so, of course, this is like the conservative case, dream case, what do you call it? Xenophobia, the personification of the fears of Canada's more xenophobic attitude about refugees and stuff is, here we go. We've got a refugee terrorist. So in Kingston, this very vague article by the CBC declares community leaders work to head off anti-Muslim backlash in Kingston terror arrests, as Kingston terror arrests wind up political debate. So it's so vague, like community leaders, and this, but they do list some of the different groups. So it's police and community groups trying to figure out how to avoid a snowball effect where where Muslims get a whole bunch of targeted violence coming their way. So Victoria, BC has been, really critical of oil development and stuff. But meanwhile, they're always dumping sewage into the water. So the Calgary Herald is reporting this few claims like this of hypocrisy with with Victoria's viewpoint. Calling the kettle black and all that. Wow, Flipbook is so. Don't use Flipbook for the news. I really like Google News for organizing articles and stuff, but nothing beats pen and paper. It's just handwriting, and it's a little bit sad, really. So let's say you wanted to have, there's many ways to get yourself a sex slave. One of them is find somebody to date who needs a husband or a wife to be, for their immigration situation. It's not really a paper marriage. It's you're scamming them, into a marriage that helps their immigration situation. And then what it gives you is power, because then you can just be like, oh, well, you don't do this, you get deported because I'll divorce you or something. And so this Ontario guy has been found guilty of doing this, of sexually assaulting his wife under threat of deportation. That's basically the headline of the CTV News article about this. And he wanted sex like 4 or 5 times a day. He sort of just groomed her into this thing, and then as soon as they got married, he started making all these demands, totally controlling her life, treating her like a slave. And now he's in shit for it, incredibly. So apparently Surrey, BC, which is huge, it's like a huge small town, but it's like a small town that is ballooning to, almost like outsize like Vancouver proper. Apparently they just haven't had their own police force. They're sick of the RCMP. Global News reports that they are going to ditch the RCMP and make their own police force. That is the Toronto Daily News for Friday, January 25th. I completely forgot about all the international news, though, because I suck. I will not make that mistake again. With that promise, this is your host, Dorian Sky. Have a fantastic Saturday, fantastic weekend.